This journal was developed in Great Ormond Street by the Vision team. Now, in Great Ormond Street they have a clinic and they have a multidisciplinary team that operates in the clinic. All the usual professionals, that makes it sound really good, doesn't it? All the usual professionals are there. They've been there for 30 years, well, it was actually longer now, but 37 years, having this vision clinic. And since 1977, they've kept a database of the children that they see. Now, the children they see are the ones that are seen locally in the local hospitals, even by their local ophthalmologist, and it's thought that they need a more specialised knowledge and they're referred up to London. I was fortunate when I was training to do this, to spend a morning at the vision clinic, and the children that were seen that morning had come a long distance. I mean, they'd been travelling for hours before they arrived at the clinic. So they do see a variety of children with very specific problems and not your everyday run-of-the-mill vision impairment. Over the years they've kept this database, and it was on the information gained from this database that they developed the journal. The focus is not just on the vision of the children, but on their development, and especially children from 0 to 5. All the multidisciplinary team are the ones you would expect: paediatrics, psychology, nursing, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, and optometry. And, well, we know the team is very well known. And this was the brief that they had. The framework was for children from 0 to 36 months with a severe and profound visual impairment. The idea is that this journal is held by families, and the emphasis all the time, and I can't repeat it too often today, is that this is something for families. It's not a working tool for us. It's not an assessment tool for teachers or for anybody else working with the child. It's something for the families to hold, to be used jointly by the parents and the professionals, supporting partnership working, whether you're working with other educational staff, medical staff, other therapists. They can enter stuff into the journal, they can look at the journal when they visit, but it's meant to be used jointly. And always it's underpinned by a scientific and developmental framework. Again, we come to the parents, and the aim is to support parental understanding of the child's development and progress. They really focused on supporting the family's understanding of the children's difficulties or the children's conditions and the development of the children, and also their ability to provide for the children's needs. I can't emphasise enough how focused they are on the parents and on working with the parents and giving the parents this understanding of what's necessary. It was not focused on developing something that can be used by practitioners as an assessment tool. And can I just say, you'll be tempted to do that. And it does give you a framework of what you're looking for, but it's not meant to be used as an assessment tool at any time. If I can look at the second bottom one, to highlight vulnerable areas that may need additional support. And I think that's a really important one, to be aware of the areas that children may well have difficulties because of their visual impairment. So these areas are definitely highlighted. And to support sharing developmental information. Now, with the research, they came up with a whole lot of findings which have gone into the formation of this book. And they found that there were developmental challenges in all areas of development. Your visually impaired child is not just challenged in their vision, they're challenged in every area of their development. And the rest of the slide just goes on to show you the different areas of development there. Some of them you will recognise, some of them you'll have come across, some of them you may well not have thought of before. But every area of development is affected to some degree in every child. And this is a very important page. The vulnerable processes, the areas that are definitely challenged. Integrating the senses in the first year of life. Now remember, we're talking about children with severe and profound visual impairment here. Becoming social and communicatable because they can't see the person who's speaking, they can't see where the noise is coming from, they can't see who they're directing their speech towards. Becoming aware of their movement potential, sharing attention, this joint attention because you're not having visual contact with people, making their world meaningful, and we'll be talking about that quite often during the day-to-day, and linking language to meaning. I'm sure you've all got stories of children who were not following the meaning of their language. They were using language, sometimes repeating phrases, and it sounds very knowledgeable, but when you get down to the nitty-gritty, you've discovered that they've no idea what these words mean. I had a wee funny example the other day, nothing to do with a visually impaired child. It was a wee 6-year-old I met at a barbecue, and I'd never met him before, and I was just chatting to him, and I said, "Oh, you look as if you've been on holiday, have you?" No, but I'm going on holiday. I said, yes. I said, "Where are you going?" Until I think, no, it's not the retail park. In the end, we decided it was probably Centre Parks he was going to. But I thought, it was obvious that retail and centre really were just other words to him. It was some kind of park. Could it be a retail park? Was that the word? But so we never really discovered where, but we're sure it was somewhere more exciting than the retail park it was going to. So linking language to meaning is very important. And these are the key innovations in the journal that are really haven't been focused on in any other piece of work that's been brought out before, or any other assessment materials or teaching materials. And they're focused on the areas of social and communicative development that are challenged by the visual impairment. Focus on shared discovery and joint attention, which is very similar to focus on children with autism, or on the autism continuum. And focus on the importance of promoting vision as early as possible. Now, that last one, I think, is quite different from a lot of other thinking going on in education, and in educational materials that are used for early years children to actually promote the vision. Even some of the orthoptists you work with and school medical officers, that's his vision and that's what you've got, and the parents are convinced that this is how the vision is going to stay. And it really sometimes takes a wee bit of persuasion that the vision can be promoted by various tasks, materials, activities. So, if you remember nothing else, if you can remember these key innovations, so what are we going to do about it? These can be helped to be overcome with appropriate early developmental guidance and promotion. And again, promotion of the vision. Intervention from the earliest days of infancy. A lot of you are working as support teachers, and you've said you're working with under 3s. How many people see children under a year old? How many see them under 6 months old? 1, 2, 3. How many see them under 3 months old? Oh, great, you're doing very well. What's the youngest you've seen a child?
As soon as language was being referred to us as a child, so we work in support work, I'm not a teacher.
So you're not a teacher, but you're aware of them from early on?
Yeah.
Great. Any teachers see children under 3-year-old? 3 months old, sorry. 3 months, oh great.
8 weeks.
8 weeks, that's great. Is that normal or was that an exception?
Yeah, well, that's quite normal, yeah.
That's great. But other areas, is it normally around 6 months? 9 months?
At the time you get the assessed.
Yeah, which is really a long time, isn't it, not to have seen the children. I know assessment can take a long time on medical sides, but very often you could well have been seeing the children from a much earlier age. Parents and key workers working together. It is difficult for parents. I mean, we know it's horrendously difficult for parents to become suddenly the parent of a visually impaired child. And I'll mention this time and time again because people can be in very responsible jobs, they can be very intelligent, they can have lots of experience, but they've never come across a visually impaired child before. And maybe nobody in the family has, and maybe they don't know anybody in their neighbourhood either. And suddenly, they're the newbie having to learn everything. And that can be very difficult for some people. It can be very frightening, and for other people, they feel they're a wee bit above. And I've come across this, I know things, I'm very experienced with things, nothing you can tell me about life. And they have to gradually come to the realisation that there's a lot they have to learn about visual impairment and about their child. And so we're working with that, and you're working with your knowledge, and you're trying to work with the parents to develop their knowledge so that they know. I've always said to parents, I feel bad when I know more about their child than they do. And I always say to parents, I shouldn't know more about your child than you do. I shouldn't know more about their visual impairment. You're the parent, you should know more than I do about them. And you want to bring the parents up to your level of knowledge that you can give them everything they need to know about their child to give them the confidence to go forward. This is obviously a kind of presentation, and this slide was away at the end, but I moved it to the beginning because I feel that right now you're beginning to think how you can use the journal. And would it be okay if I did this? I wonder if I could use it in this way. So can I just assure you right at this point that whatever you're thinking of doing with it is okay. It's okay if families complete all of it or some of it, with your support or without your support. It's okay if they just want to talk about the pages of the journal and not use it. They might not want to use the paperwork. It can be very off-putting. It's okay if they want you to fill in the paperwork or another professional coming in. It's okay if they just want to dip into it at a particular point in the child's development, perhaps an area at a time when the child has plateaued and they're beginning to feel a bit unsure, then they might want to dip into it at that point. And it's okay if parents don't want to use it at all, but you can have a look at it for that child. So if you want to open your books and have a look for the introduction booklet, which will look like that, right at the front of your folder. And I would strongly advise you to read the introduction before you start to use the journal at all. If you read nothing else, have this as your CPD for this week. It really gives you confidence to use the journal. It gives you the background, how it was devised, and I've covered that very briefly, but it gives you much more detail. Guidance and example of how to use the journal, detail of who might contribute to it and when, and information, and this is quite important and there's nowhere else, information of norms and expectations for typically developing babies and children, as well as for babies and children with a visual impairment. And this is discussed later on. So I would strongly recommend that you read the introduction. Now you'll already have seen from the markers that it's done in stages. 1A and B through to 5. And these are the approximate ages that each stage covers. 0 to 6 months, 4 to 12, and you'll see there's an overlap. Children, I don't know if there's a very typical child who will follow each of these stages exactly. Children are never typical, each child is totally different, but the majority will fit in here into one of the stages. Can I say that when this journal was being devised, there was a huge amount of consultation. There were consultation panels, there were sets of consultation parents, there were panels of visual impairment support teachers, And that went on for, I think, about 18 months before the journal was completed. And everybody went through it with a fine-tooth comb and discussed what they thought should be in it, what shouldn't, what they liked and what they didn't like. And one of the areas that was discussed widely was whether ages should be in it at all. You'll discover that as you go through it, if you turn to stage 1, it will not mention what age that covers. But the stages are there, this page is there in the journal, but it's not brought up at every opportunity. So that parents are not worried about the fact that my child is only at stage 2 and they're 15 months or whatever. But parents felt that it was important that it was in at some point, just as a yardstick to compare progress, even for themselves. At the same time, the parents did not want specific age expectations against each goal, so that they weren't being reminded at every opportunity, your child is only here and they should be so many months ahead. The overlap of age bands takes into account that children of different levels of vision are going to come to different stages at different times and at a different rate. Children with most profound levels of visual impairment are going to acquire skills at a slightly slower rate, slower in some than in others, especially in the early years. The stages are in a sequence of generally accepted order of achieving the goals. You will find occasionally there will be some things that a child will do and you think, oh my goodness, I didn't think they'd be ready to do that yet in one particular area. They may jump ahead. But normally, these are the order that they'll develop the skills. And each stage builds on the previous stages, and it's the stage of readiness for new learning, to move on to something new. We've already discussed the overlap of developmental ages, and each stage is developed into 5 developmental areas. Now, in the original, it's coloured. I'm sorry to say you don't have the colour. But you'll see there are little icons, and each developmental area has a different icon. So here are the 5 areas, and they don't necessarily match up with any other piece of work like Oregon or whatever, but they cover each area of development. Social and emotional, communication, language and meaning, and the language is really broken down very well. Play and learning, movement and mobility, and self-care. And in each of these areas, there are challenges for the visually impaired child. And it's important that let's say a check that each area is watched over, and you don't sort of think, well, they're doing fine in this area, they're progressing fine. Every area must be covered. I can ask you to take out the stage 2 booklet, or turn to stage 2. You may not want to remove it. Have a look at stage 2 and turn to the section on communication, language and meaning. And if you look through it, you'll see that there are different headings, there are different sections within the communication. You have listening and attending, communication, understanding language and meaning, and speech. As we go through each stage, the general headings remain the same, and the goals differ, obviously, as we go through. And how do you fill them in? How can they be used? Is there a time when you definitely want to fill them in? And I know that I can remember from anything like that, this I was doing with parents. Parents will tell you that the child can do something. Oh yeah, they can do that. Yeah, oh yeah, you can do it. And I remember one mum saying, yeah, definitely, can definitely do that. And I went back the next time and I mentioned the same goal again, and she said, oh yeah, you can definitely do that now. And there was a big difference, because she obviously had a wee feeling about it the first time I was there. And it probably should have been entered as a possibly. But by the time I went back the next time, she had looked at it carefully. Maybe there had been a wee bit of progress, but by that point she knew this was it could definitely be filled in. If you want to go back to that introduction again and turn to page 12. of the introduction. If I would say to encourage the parents to use the column "What my child does and enjoys," it's amazing how that can be used as a record of what the child is doing at that particular stage. And even in a month's time, the child will have moved on from that. He or she will suddenly no longer be doing that, can be doing it really well, or it's something you just remember in the past and say, oh gosh, yes, I had forgotten that's what they did at that point. When a child as young as this is making progress every week, it's so easy to forget at what point they started to do something. And I think it's really just a couple of sentences filled in by mum, which might mean nothing to you, but we'll bring it back to mum exactly at what point the wee one started to do something and what it was that they did that showed her they were able to do this particular goal. Because the goals obviously are quite wide in their wording, but will be specific for a child, and if mum can mark down what it was specific for the child in this case, then it's really good, both as a record for her, but also for professionals coming in, or for somebody to look back and say, right, at that point they were able to do this. And gosh, they haven't really moved on very far, or haven't they moved on amazingly well from that point? And you can see the rate of progress. So, yes, possibly and definitely is really good, but I would stress also the column for comments. Now, if you go right to the back of the folder, and there is a marker saying activity cards, and that's what you're looking for. These are the cards that personally, well, and one of the good things, there are lots of good things about the journal, but these are one of the good things. They're providing ideas, suggestions, how to support the child, activities you could be doing with them at that particular stage, strategies to use, and these follow on, they are linked into the stages in the journal. So there are 2 cards in each developmental area for each stage in the journal. So at stage 1, or 1A, there'll be 2 cards for communication and learning and language, and 2 cards for self-care. And they are progressive. You work your way through card 1 before you get to card 2. There is so much information on these cards, so many ideas, that no matter how experienced you are, I would bet you that you'll find something new on these cards that you haven't thought about. At the very least, it's wonderful to have it written down in a form that you can encourage the parents to use, rather than having to go over it all verbally or make up a card yourself. It's all written down there for you. It's also in a form that parents can use very easily. They can take it out and stick it up in the fridge, if that's this week's stage that the child is at. They can make a copy of it, and more parents are able to make copies of things, and they can give that to granny, or to the babysitter or the childminder, or to perhaps even to the nursery. Just ideas of what the child can do. I'm sure you've come across families where granny looks after the wee one a lot, and granny's had umpteen grandchildren before and umpteen children, but she's never had a visually impaired child to look after before, and she's not very sure what to do. And should she play with them, and what should she do? Should she just do the same as she did with the other children? And it's really comforting for her to be given a card to say, look, here are some games. There probably won't be anything new that she hasn't done 100 times before, but to know that it's the right thing to do for this wee one, it's the right thing to do for their development, is really comforting. And I know that I've come across a lot of grandparents that really like having these activity cards. And the form of having the separate cards was one of the ideas from parents, or one of the things that the parents really wanted, was to have them in a form that could be removed and could be used on its own. And again, there are no ages on it. So even if you're giving it to a childminder, there's nothing on it to say this is what age the child is, this is for. These are the cards that are covered by each stage. As you'll go along, you would find that out. So you will have card 1 and 2 in each developmental area, and each card there is progression from card to card. So you would work your way through card 1 before you got to card 2. It's not a matter of dipping into the 2 cards, it's actually a progression from 1 to the other. It's just an easy way of recording at what stage the child is at in each developmental area. And it makes it easier to compare development across the areas. And I'm sure you'll have children, who are making really good progress in mobility, but their language seems to be at a standstill or on a kind of plateau. And other children, it will vary. So this is quite a good way of it's very quickly coloured in. How often you colour it in is up to you, how often you fill it in. The family completes with the support of whoever's going in to see them. So it might be every 3 months, every 6 months. And again, in your introduction, it discusses this, how often to fill it in. General overview of development. When we looked at the introduction, I was saying it's something that you should read before you start. And again, this is something I would advise you to have a read over before you start to use the journal. I can also say it's a really good section to lift out if you have a journal in your possession. It's a good section to lift out to give to somebody working with a visually impaired child for the first time. It may be, and it very often is, a case worker, a key worker in a nursery. It could be one of the therapists who has come in, who has never worked with a visually impaired child before. And it gives a background to visual impairment. It gives advice about toys and materials, about the development of young children with visual impairment, references and sources, and further reading. It's a really good piece of work for somebody as an introduction to visual impairment working.